Hello, everybody. Welcome to Flavour Text, a monthly podcast where we explore the lore and stories in Arkham Horror, the living card game, scenario by scenario and campaign by campaign. I'm CrabbyTerror8, and I'm joined, as always, by my erstwhile colleague, Kevling. How are you, Kevling?
I'm fine, thank you, mate. How are you?
Yeah, I'm pretty good. Yeah, how are things going with you and lockdown and all that kind of thing? Things going well?
Yeah, things are going okay here. Things are starting to unlock, shops are opening again, and I think in a couple of weeks' time, what they call hospitality can open again, so we can get back to our game store and play Arkham Horror again. That's the most important thing.
That's fantastic. Yeah. I've been playing the second scenario now in Dunwich. Not Dunwich. God, I've got Dunwich on the mind at the moment. I've been doing so much stuff on Innsmouth, and wow, really enjoying it. So really good.
I haven't even started Innsmouth yet. I've just ordered myself some fancy new tokens, so I'm waiting for those to come, and then I'm going to dive in.
Right. Wow. What are we up to today, Kevling? What are we talking about today?
Well, we are kicking off the podcast proper with the Dunwich Legacy. Ooh. And because of the way these first couple of scenarios are constructed, we're doing them both at the same time, in the same episode.
It's kind of obvious, I know, but spoilers, if you have not played the Dunwich Legacy, or you don't want any aspect of the Dunwich Legacy spoiled for you, stop this podcast right now, because we are going to be covering everything about the lore and the story.
And I guess I'll restate as well, if you didn't catch our introduction podcast, this isn't going to be a gameplay guide, and it's more a discussion of how the various mechanics work and whether they support or contradict the story that's trying to be told. It's basically how the mechanics all fit into the narrative. Okay, so, to set the scene, we have a prologue for the Dunwich Legacy where we are meeting Dr. Henry Armitage. He's our former mentor, and basically he wants some help. So basically he's trying to track down his two colleagues, Dr. Francis Morgan and Warren Rice. They're both disappeared. And he's got a very familiar feeling, which I'm assuming relates to the Dunwich Horror itself, which is obviously one of Lovecraft's most famous stories, and this is effectively a sequel to that, with some of the same characters interwoven throughout it. Definitely. So yes, so Dr. Armitage is extremely concerned that his two friends have gone missing. His hands are shaking, he's probably spilling it.
Yeah, he's drinking the Pinot, he's pale and sweaty and anxious, he's really worried. But the thing that's kind of annoying about Armitage is he doesn't say why. Like, he actually doesn't tell us kind of why he's worried until afterwards.
Yes, he just says he's got this nagging feeling that there's something else going on, a very familiar feeling, in bold even in the prologue.
I don't want to jump to the end, but the thing that's kind of frustrating is at the end it goes, he tells you a story and it all kind of makes sense and it's terrible, but it doesn't really tell you that. I guess it assumes you'd have to go and read the Dunwich Horror to sort of get the full story yourself. So he does relate the story, but you have to wait till you've done the hard. You've got to earn it, in other words. So he wants you to go and risk your life. He's happy drinking the Pinot, but he won't tell you why. So it's kind of interesting, isn't it, that you just kind of, he's upset, he's anxious, he's drinking Pinot, and you as the investigator are like, oh, well, we'll just go off and check this out without any other explanation. It's like, fine, off you go.
So basically then, this prologue gives you a choice, doesn't it? And I think it's obviously it's the first time we've had anything like this in Arkham Horror, and correct me if I'm wrong, I'm not sure it's something that's been done again, is it? We actually have a choice of which of the first two scenarios you do first, and they each play out differently depending on whether they are played first or second.
Yeah, because in the Dream Eaters campaign, it's parallel, so it's not.
Yes.
You know what I mean? The A and the B run parallel. So you're right. It is interesting that they didn't go back to this, and I can kind of understand why in a sense because it makes things from a. We talked last week or last time in the last episode that just putting these stories together would be a bit of a logistical nightmare. Trying to make it all linked together. So I can imagine that this just makes it much more complicated, and I'm not sure. I don't know what you think, but do you think if they just forced you to do one and then the other, would it have made that much of a difference? I mean, they could have done it that way anyway. I mean, I just don't know whether
Yeah.
the payoff of getting the choice is it really worth the complexity? I'm not sure. Yeah, interesting.
Yeah, I mean, I guess the outcome is the main difference is who gets rescued, isn't it? I mean,
Yes.
Again, spoilers. We're looking for two people, but you will only find one of them, and
Yeah.
whoever you find depends on the order you play the scenarios.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
If you find either of them, you could find none.
Yes.
Yeah. And there are minor consequences in later scenarios, aren't there? He gives you these two options. He says he basically says he's really worried about Warren. He thinks he's in trouble, so he wants you to find him. But then he says you also might wish to ask Francis for help. So it's almost as though it's guiding you to go and find Warren, but you still have the option of going to find Francis for some advice if you think that might be useful. Yeah. So Warren Rice was last seen at the Miskatonic University.
Yep.
Whereas Francis Morgan was last seen gambling at the Clover Club.
Yeah.
So the choice is, who do we go after first? And that is how it leaves us at the start of the campaign.
Yeah, yeah. And actually, I hadn't thought about this before, but the way that's couched is kind of strange because obviously one person is about giving you advice, the other one, he's worried about him. So if you go after Warren Rice first, why would you need to go and get the advice later? You know what I mean? It's sort of, if you really think about it, it sort of makes doing the House Always Wins second, in a sense, kind of a bit. I mean, it's not the way that it plays out, but if one is about giving you advice, surely you'd need that first, because after you've gone and checked out for Warren, the advice, is that advice any necessary anymore? So it seems a little bit strange from that perspective, point, yeah. Isn't it?
In terms of the podcast structure, then, we're going to just go in alphabetical order and do 1A first, yes, which is extracurricular activity.
Yeah, yeah.
So,
can I ask you, Kevling, which one do you generally do first? Are you an extracurricular activity kind of guy, or are you a House Always Wins kind of guy, or do you sort of sit on the fence?
I think I probably just end up doing them in order. I think I just look at it and go, actually, it doesn't really matter which way round you do it. You're only going to succeed at one of them.
Right.
I'll do extracurricular activity first, I think. I think that's what I do. I can't really remember, to be honest.
I've only ever done House Always Wins first. I've never done... Sounds strange. I don't know why, but I've never done extracurricular.
So even after what you were just saying about why would you go and... Mind you, you just fulfilled the logic there, haven't you? You're going to ask Francis Morgan for help,
yes,
before you go and find
Warren Rice.
And even though you know it's pointless, she did it again the next time.
That's right. Yeah, that's right. What's the definition of insanity? Doing the same thing over and over again? Because I don't know why. In my mind, I always think, well, you get the help and advice first, wouldn't you? Because then...
Well, yeah, that would make sense.
Yeah. I mean, for most people, when they come to this first, it's really 6 of one and half a dozen of the other, right? Because you really just don't know.
You're going in blind, aren't you?
Yeah.
You don't know what the benefit is of...
No.
And obviously, if it made sense that you should do one first before the other, then, like you say, it would have just been a strict sequence in the campaign. The fact it gives you the choice means it can't really make that much difference in the grand scheme of things.
No, and it doesn't. I mean, the thing is, strategically, if you wanted, if you know the scenarios well, you can then say, look, do I want to end up with an ally that boosts my fight, or boosts my strength or my intellect? Because that's really kind of what you get in a sense,
Yes.
from doing this. So if you were a seeker, you might go, well, having extra intellect would be even better. I'll lean into that. Warren Rice. If you're, I don't know, if you're Roland, if you're playing Roland, then you might go Francis Morgan because you're getting a boost to your fight. So, of course, you would do, House Always Wins first. Do you see what I mean? So you make this decision. I guess we're toddling off to university, aren't we?
I guess we are, yes. Let's see if we can track Warren down and work out what... Should be fairly straightforward. He was last seen in the Humanities Building, we are told. So we tootle along to the university and off we go to try and find him.
Yeah, so the Miskatonic University, I mean, if you've played Midnight Masks, which most people would have done, you'd know Miskatonic University as a location in Arkham from that. So it's kind of nice to be able to zoom into Miskatonic University and have, be actually wandering around the actual university and the campus.
Yeah.
It's quite a nice little link. It's nice the way that the developers have, used location to connect things together rather than it being sort of disparate places that are not connected at all. So that's kind of nice that they do that. I think that's quite good.
Definitely. And in terms of structure, we have a layout of 6 locations. We're basically slapped in the middle in Miskatonic's quad. And then, the world is your oyster, as they say. So you have this choice of 5 other locations to go investigating to try and find Warren Rice. I almost forgot who he was then.
Yeah, and it's done in a nice sort of semicircle, isn't it? So you're sort of, like you say, you're in the middle, and then you've got sort of east, west, south. Sort of, I think the science building is in the east, right? The humanities building is in the west. You've got the student union down south, if you like.
Yeah.
The text is quite nice because it kind of evokes this idea of, and I like this. You see it quite a bit in horror things where they'll take a normal location, and if you then suddenly empty it and turn all the lights off, it becomes very sinister.
Yes.
And this is how they've kind of done this with Miskatonic University, which during the day would be full of students and lots of life, but they sort of every card has this flavor text on it, sort of saying things like, Oren Library has got gargoyles on the walls, and the science building dominates the eastern campus, and the admin building's alone, and it's got creepers on it. And so they really dial up the kind of the creepiness of it being nighttime, I think.
And it's nice to actually stop and pay attention to this flavour text as well, because it's very easy when you're playing the game. You just write, okay, where do I want to go? Boom, 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 off I go. But just reading the text on these cards, it does sort of set the scene subtly for what we're about to face.
Yeah.
Like Humanities Building, it says he was last seen there, but the building's in darkness and it's silent.
Hint.
Whereas the Student Union, there's people bustling around in there, the lights are on, and then in the science building it's plunged into darkness, but ominously there is a light coming from one room in the basement, which leads you to think there's something untoward going on.
You know what? I couldn't believe it because I'd never read that text. And when I read it, I thought they're actually telling you here what they're kind of, they're actually telling you what's going on. Because it's weird because
it's very subtle.
It is very subtle and it's there, but I'd never taken the time, but it's basically telling you there's something dodgy going on in the science building, like you say.
Yes.
Whereas in the humanity buildings, it's dark as, and there's nothing going on there, even though it's telling you to go to the humanities building first, right? So it actually is really explicit about that, right? It's this is a classic fetch quest. Go and get somebody. And he was last seen in the humanities building, which is a huge hint, of course. But like you say, actually, if you read the flavor text, you would kind of surmise that there's something going on in the science building. And in fact, if you go to the science building, it starts talking about how there's a pungent stench. Even when you can't get into the alchemical labs. There's sort of not a pungent. Yeah, there's a pungent stench. There's a nasty ooze. So whatever's going on in the science building, it can't be good because the ooze, I think you've got to test for it, or you take damage or something. It's like there's some serious nasty stuff going down in the science building. Yeah, it's so true that actually it's interesting how they kind of give the game away in a way. The other thing I like is in the quad, obviously you can do the classic thing where you can resign. It's so funny that they let you resign and walk away before you start, but they kind of say, oh, the gates look like you're a prisoner, or something, rather than, so even the gate, even the fact it's got gates on it is kind of, you're locked in, you can't get out, they kind of do everything they can to kind of, kind of make the thing as creepy as possible.
And then also I like the way that 3 of these locations then go on to reveal other locations once you open them.
Mm-hmm.
And which is again is a nice touch. It's a feel of exploring a location.
Yep.
But then one of them, when you go into the administration building, this is where the setup will differ depending on whether you are playing this scenario first or second. So there are 2 different versions of the faculty officers. There's the night is still young, which will be there if it's early in the evening, or the hour is late if you're playing this scenario second. So obviously that will affect the outcome of the story.
Yeah, quite dramatically. And it's like you say, it's really nice the way they because it does feel like, I think it's the strength of this scenario is the way it feels like you're prowling around the campus trying to work out where Warren Rice is, and there's a number of doors that are locked that you just can't get into. You get hints that there's something going on, but you just can't get into them. Clearly you have to do something else before you can access these other areas. So I think they do a good job of using the locations and the way they're gated to evoke this idea of you going around campus trying to find out what's going on before you could actually find out what's going on, which I think is the strongest part of the scenario.
When you unlock Jazz and the act advances,
yep.
Basically at that point it says there's a crash coming from the science building. A student rushes towards you. Help, there's some kind of animal loose in the chem labs. I only barely caught a glimpse of it, but he shudders. I think it's heading to the dorms. You've got to do something. So it sets the scene that there is something else going on. There is this creature
yep.
in the science building. So that light in the basement should have given us a warning.
Yeah.
But basically, he's telling you the students need saving, effectively.
Yeah.
So that then opens up more options, and how you play now will determine the outcome of the scenario. So we've got a choice of going to the science building to see what on earth's going on with this creature, or going to the dormitories to protect the student, or at least warn them, and so that they can escape.
Yes.
And unfortunately, they are mutually exclusive.
They are, and why would you go to the faculty offices? So can I ask you, Kevling, what's going on in this? Who's doing the sciencey stuff? Why is this science experiment happening, and why is there an alchemical concoction there that's only there if you go later? Is somebody in there creating the alchemical concoction, but also creating the experiment? Because I guess I'd played extracurricular activity and always only got certain outcomes. I'd assumed it was Warren Rice doing the experiments and something had gone horribly wrong and he'd made a mistake or something, but that's not what's going on here. It's not really clear. The only thing is Warren Rice, if you rescue him, talks about people being on campus who kind of shouldn't be there.
Yeah.
But there's not really any explanation as to why this is happening. At least none that I could find.
No, you're right. And if I'm honest, I've never given it that much thought as I play it. It's only now we're sitting down to try and dissect it that you can almost see a gap in the story.
Yeah, because I understand in the Dunwich horror that something goes on a rampage through Dunwich, And it seems like they're sort of recreating that idea of a rampage. So I'm sort of assuming that the agents of Yog-Sothoth, magician of Yog-Sothoth, or some of the thralls are in the science lab doing this. But how did they get into the science lab? Why are they doing it? And why is it that the alchemical concoction is only available later? Because, I understand that if you do extracurricular first, you get a bit more time, because if you do it second, you skip, is it Agenda 2A, don't you? You sort of go straight to Agenda 2B. So you sort of skip a step, so it happens faster.
Yes.
But no, it's never explained why this experiments happened in the first place, and who made the alchemical concoction or anything. It sort of happens, but it's not really explained at all. Or, what's the reasoning? Is it just to kill the students on campus, or was it to kind of have a diversion so that they could kidnap Warren Rice? Was it just a diversionary tactic? So it's really kind of unclear in that sense about what's going on and why it's going on. It's sort of very confused from that perspective.
I guess in some ways that's part of the setting, isn't it? We've been plunged into this story with no idea what's going on.
Yeah.
So we wouldn't have all that information presented to us.
No.
Life is never that tidy.
Yeah. I guess that's true. But I'm trying to get my head around what must have happened then. They must have come onto campus, tied up Warren Rice because they want to kidnap him, release the experiment as a diversion, and then got him out of the campus. That seems to be what's going on, I guess. Something like that. It feels like that's the kind of way things have sort of worked out in the but I agree with you. It's sort of in this situation where there's stuff happening and we don't really, not because we don't know as investigators and as the players, we don't really know very much about the story or what's going on. So you're right, it's sort of this sort of unexplained stuff happening. Yeah. But you could imagine the scenario where, they're just kidnapping him and we're chasing down the kidnappers. You know what I mean? They could have.
Thinking about it, if we are playing extracurricular activities second, there's no sign of Warren Rice because they've kidnapped him. So perhaps what the story is they have forced him to make this concoction.
Yeah, right.
And that's why it's only there when you're playing this second.
Yeah.
Whereas if you're playing it first and he's there, I think he's still bound and gagged in his office, isn't he?
Yeah.
So you rescue him before they've had a chance to force him to create the concoction. If you look at the picture of him on his card, he does look like he's
got the alchemical concoction, doesn't he? He looks like he's putting it into some kind of a bug spray device.
Yeah. So maybe he was actually planning, maybe he knew what was going on and he was trying to stop it.
Yeah.
But from a mechanics point of view, I do quite like the way that plays out. That the experiment bursts out and then he is rampaging through the university, making his way to where he can hear all the noise and commotion going on from the students' dormitories. I think that bit works really well. How it fits into the narrative, I think, like you're right, is it's not clear to us. But what I will say as well is if anyone is out there listening to this podcast and is shouting at their speakers saying, "You idiots, you've missed X," please let us know. Please put us out of our misery.
That's right. Because I'm on my second glass of wine, so, maybe I'm missing something.
So just before we move on to House Always Wins then, let's just summarise what the different outcomes are from extracurricular activities based on how we played it. So, Resolution 1 is only available if you're playing the scenario first, and that is you have rescued Warren Rice. Yay! Unfortunately, the students are dead.
Yep. Oops. I shouldn't laugh, but yeah.
Because we focused more on doing what Armitage wanted rather than dealing with the situation that arose.
Yes.
Resolution 2, we were able to get to the dormitories.
Yep.
We warned the students, they all escaped.
Yeah, but
Good for us, we saved the students.
yes. But hold on, Warren isn't saved though in that circumstance, is he?
He's not. No, he was kidnapped.
Yes.
So we failed there.
Yeah.
Also, I didn't mention as well, if you don't save the students, I think you add a tablet token to the bag, so that adds an extra level of it just worsens your odds ever so slightly for the entire rest of the campaign.
Yes.
So that might, when you're replaying this scenario, that might help you decide which path you want to take. And then the other option, Resolution 3, is you have saved the students by defeating the experiment. And if I remember right, there are some remains of the experiment in one of the later scenarios, so that's a trigger point there that you could prevent by defeating the experiment. And then Resolution 4 is when the agenda deck runs out, I think, and you don't manage to do anything. The students die, you've lost Warren Rise, and the experiment is still rampaging around. And that gives you the extra option as well if you have been unconscious for several hours.
Yes, right.
I can't remember how that pans out, but we'll pick that up in a future scenario, I'm sure.
Yeah, that's the that's the kind of the worst case scenario. You don't manage to do anything particularly useful, and of course you can all get defeated as well, which is the sort of resolution 0. It's the non-resolution, right?
Yes, there's resign and defeat. Yes.
Yeah.
So that again, that's you've not saved the students, you've not rescued Warren Rise, and you've not defeated the experiment.
No.
But at least you're still conscious.
Yes, exactly. So you can be left in this lovely situation where you don't know what the hell's going on because you failed everything. You've got no idea. And I'm always one of these people. I never read resolutions I haven't done. So I think the first time I ever played Dunwich, I failed so many of them, particularly playing solo. I had no idea what was going on most of the time, which was sort of, bumbling around, kind of just got no idea. So actually getting Warren Rice is a fairly narrow criteria overall, really.
Yes, you can only do it if you play this scenario first, and it has lots of negative consequences.
Yeah, and you have to have the presence of mind to know to go to the faculty officers.
Ignore the screams, ignore the commotion,
ignore the experiment, ignore everything basically.
I was sent here to find Warren Rice, and that's what I'm going to do.
Exactly, which again, that there's a bit of a dissonance there, because once you know the scenario, you know to do that. But if you think about it sort of in a sort of real life situation, you're wandering around campus, you find Jazz Mulligan, and then I think when you find Jazz, that's when the science thing happens. Do you then know that?
Yes.
And then a commotion breaks out in the science faculty. There's a rampaging monster heading for the student union. You're hardly going to go, I'll just go to the faculty office now and just, like you wouldn't do that, would you? You wouldn't. You'd be like,
I wonder if he's over there.
Yeah. Oh, there's nothing happening at the faculty offices. Let me just go over there. You know what I mean? Like,
yes.
Because you're not even given a choice, are you? If you get Warren Rice, that's it. You go to resolution. You can't go, let's pick up Warren Rice and go and deal with the concoction. You can't do that, can you? You can't.
No.
You don't have that choice of deciding whether. And I think they sort of changed this in later scenarios and things. They kind of don't give you a lot of choice in this one. You either get Warren, and like you say, all of the students get murdered, or you save the students and you don't get Warren, but you can't do both. Cool.
Right. So, shall we move on to the House Always Wins?
Yeah, this is where I cut in the Italian accordion music, and no, I don't. No. So, House Always Wins. What's the story here, Kevling?
So this is where we have been sent to find Dr. Francis Morgan to see if he can help us in our search for Warren Rice. And again, there is a slight difference in setup based on whether you were playing this first or second. So you basically get a different Act 3A.
Yeah.
You get fold or all in. And each of them give a different set of outcomes.
Yes. Yeah, we start at this sort of very bad Italian restaurant, don't we?
La Bella Luna. La Bella Luna was a, air quotes, multi-purpose establishment.
Yeah.
So obviously this is a front for this speakeasy.
Yeah, and I love the bit you can resign, and it says it was a bust. So you just this idea, you're just standing there going, I came from the cannelloni and the Ruffino. That's all I know. As they sort of roast.
It's just a
restaurant. But apparently they only sell spaghetti or something. Like it's really like the venue is awful and the place is awful. It's like there's a goon on the door. I love it. It's so fantastic because it evokes the 1920s where there were these horrible establishments that kind of had these fronts, and they were really just for people to drink alcohol that was prohibited. Like tea rooms where everyone got served gin in teacups, and they all pretended like they were just drinking tea, just to sort of avoid the cops and all that kind of thing. I really like that bit that's like, you resign. It was a bust,
And again, similar to what we were saying on extracurricular activities, if you don't stop, it's easy to just dive in and start playing the scenario, but I've never actually noticed the picture on Agenda 1A is of a giant monster rampaging through the club.
Yes!
So it's how have I not noticed that before? It definitely shows you what we're going to be facing later on.
Yeah, spoilers. Like,
it spoiled its own scenario.
You'd think they could have used some other image of just something, like instead of, like you say, a monster right there on the... I know, when I looked at it, I thought, what?
Again, I guess that's just me. I'm just focused on the word. Right, what are we going to do? What are we going to do? Let's go and do it.
Yeah,
Boom, off we go.
Yeah.
And, no, stop. Smell the roses. Take it all in.
Yeah. And just on that, I mean, I do like the flavour text. That'd be a great name for a podcast, wouldn't it? I do like the flavour text on the Clover Club locations because it really brings the locations to life. I mean, I can imagine what the Clover Club would be like, when I sort of think about it in my mind, because I think they do a good job of that with the flavour text.
Yeah, you got things like, as you approach the card room, the clinking of poker chips and the shuffling of cards is punctuated by shouts of revelry and frustration. Your thoughts are nearly drowned out by the racket. Excellent bit of scene setting.
Yeah. Oh, the booze, in the bar, the booze is literally the shelves are groaning with booze. There's so much of it on there, and that kind of thing. Or the plush leather chairs in the sort of sitting area. So I think they do a really nice job of bringing those locations to life. It's really fantastic.
So we are here to find Dr. Morgan. So the act starts off, the club is packed, perhaps someone knows where he is. And it gives an interesting mechanic here that obviously plays into the fact that this is, a card room, gambling, etc. When you reveal a chaos token, you may treat it as if it was another chaos token. But remember that you have cheated. I love that. That is fantastic. Group limit once per round, so you can cheat your way through the scenario if you really want to. It's actually letting you do it, but there could be consequences.
Yes, and a bit like extracurricular activity, you could end up with another tablet in the chaos bag. So it does have some lasting consequences if you cheat, right?
Yes. Ah, yeah, there was when I remember playing through this the first time with our play group, and there was one member of our team insisted on cheating at every opportunity.
Well, if you're going to do it once, you might as well keep doing it, because it's
Definitely.
it's only a one-off thing, so you might as well keep doing it. Yeah, the other
Yeah, once per round.
once per round, you might as well just keep cheating like crazy. The other thing I like about and I think you mentioned this off air before, was the mechanics around the goons. Really works really well in this sort of first part of the scenario as well, doesn't it?
It certainly does. The fact you can the criminals all have aloof, don't they? It's on the agenda 1A.
Yes,
they've got aloof until you hit one of them, which kind of makes sense, really. Yes, they will ignore you until you punch them in the face.
Yeah. And also the pit boss is prowling around. You can imagine him sort of eyeing you up suspiciously. So if you try and get any clues while he's at the same location, he will also attack as well. So it's this great kind of thing where I think this is an awesome example of where story and gameplay mechanic come together in a lovely way, because you have to kind of, avoid him. So you're asking people questions, you're getting drinks, but you've got to make sure that he's not in the same location that you are.
Nobody spots you.
Yeah, he'll spot you. And I think that is really, really well done, how they do that, because it feels like, you're literally kind of going around this club trying to get this illicit information without getting spotted by the goons, which is just fantastic. I think it's great. Yeah.
And also the other mechanic as well is, because we are wandering around asking questions, trying to find things out, none of the locations have clues apart from the initial La Bella Luna.
Yes.
It's all done by taking other types of actions.
Yes.
Like you're spending money in the card room,
Yep.
or you're buying a drink in the bar, and you're talking to the bartender and trying to find things out.
Yeah.
So again, I think that's another clever way of bending the mechanics to suit the narrative.
Yeah, it is. I have to say, though, as a big player of Seekers, it pisses me off. Because, I've got my Ursula. She can, do 2 investigations, move and investigate. If you're a Seeker, it totally negates your normal ability, because apart from, like you say, in the La Bella Luna, you can't get clues in the usual sort of way. You can't parley. You've got to do it in other ways, which is, like you say, is perfectly fine. But
it's only for this first part of the scenario it does turn back more into a normal, inverted commas, scenario in the second half. But yeah, I just love that the way they've done that. Yeah, you like you say, you're sneaking around, you're asking questions, and you're trying to make sure that the boss doesn't spot you while you're doing it. Yeah, trying to keep out of his way, asking subtle questions. What's really going on? Have you seen Francis around?
And the gambling theme is great, because if you go to the game room or the card room, I've spent 3 or 4 turns trying to get bloody clues and failing and trying to get those clues, and it's just like you're at the roulette table, or you're playing cards or blackjack, and you're just not getting things are just not going your way. So it's like you say, it's thematically really, and like you say, you can cheat, right? So you can can cheat. Anyway, if you just want to get the clues anyway, so it's great.
And obviously, if the pit boss is there, he has seen you cheating, and he will instantly come after you.
I like the campus idea, but I think for me, the house always wins. It's almost like an Ocean's 11 kind of heist feeling to it. It's got that kind of feel that you're, and particularly if you're not playing solo, if you're playing with other people, you're kind of trying to get this information and avoid the criminals. It's got a really wonderful feel, and I think the gameplay really fits nicely with the story in this section. I think it's great. So, I mean, the main thing you want to do is get into the VIP, is get into the back area as quickly as possible, obviously. And it's a classic Arkham Horror situation where there's a bottleneck location. There's this sort of hallway, and then it opens up into some new areas, which, when it's always random, right? The 3 back areas are randomized, right? So out of, you don't know which is which,
And that darkened hall doesn't go into play until you advance the act, so you've got to do those initial 4 clues per investigator. So you don't even know that's where you're heading the first time.
No. And it doesn't matter how many times you play, you don't know which is the VIP, you don't know which is the art gallery, you don't know which is the back alley. It's random. So unlike extracurricular activity where the locations are the locations, and it doesn't, once you've played it once, you sort of know. In this one, there's an element of randomness that, which survives every time you play, is you don't know which is which. So, and that's something, obviously, that gets used again and again and again and again and again in Arkham Horror card game, is this sort of randomized use of locations. Sometimes that, you're drawing 3 of, say, 4 or 6, and so there's even more kind of variability. And it's really nice because it keeps things fresh, right? You never know where you need to go, which is really nice. So, you sort of move forward to these 3 areas. With the agenda, though, how long have you got before then? What happens in the second? Because after the first agenda, they're no longer aloof, are they? They start kind of coming for you, don't they, or something? They get their suspicions get too much.
So it's 4 doom on the first agenda. So you've got 4 rounds to try and find what you need and get into that darkened hall. Yeah, and if you've already done extracurricular activity, you skip agenda 2A as well and go straight to 2B. So that is this scenario will be shorter. Well, like the other one, if it's the second scenario of the campaign, you do skip a phase almost. Well, not a phase.
You go straight to the monsters breaking through, don't you? Is that right?
You do, yes. Spawn a random enemy from the set-aside hideous abominations into the Clover Club Lounge, and you remove La Bella Luna, so then you lose your resign option at that stage.
Not the spaghetti!
There's no escaping now. All hell has broken loose.
So, again, it's not really... I mean, it's less of a problem with this scenario, but it's not really explained why these monsters show up. They just show up, right? You don't know why they're there or how they came to be there. There's no kind of suspicious wizards standing around casting spells. They just turn up, right, and crash through the location. But it seems like the MO here of these Jogsoth off people is that they're using these monsters to cause diversion so they can kidnap people. I think that's kind of the way it seems to work, right? It's sort of that kind of thing. So, but assuming we get ourselves into that back area, there's these 3 areas. There's the art gallery, there's VIP, which is the one we really want to get to, right? And then there's the back alley. These are interesting locations. The art gallery is, all that tells you is that the Clover Club's owned by Peter Clover. So it's not called the Clover Club just because you're lucky. I always assumed it was because... Oh, Lucky Clover, but it's actually...
Lucky Clover, of course, yeah.
It's actually because Peter Clover... and for some reason, it's an art gallery, but he has his financial... his financial books sitting in the art gallery for some reason. It's... and there's some pretty easy clues. You do lose resources for failing to investigate, but it's a pretty easy location to get some clues because I think the shroud is low on the art gallery.
It's a 2, yeah.
So it's fairly low, easy victory points. I think. Is it a victory for getting it?
It is, yes. All 3 of these are victory point locations.
And then the VIP area. This is where you would, if you get there first. Morgan will be there, right? He's in this sort of fugue state thinks he's playing cards and he's sort of sitting there, right?
Yes, if this is the first scenario, Morgan is in there. Otherwise, he isn't. Whereas if it's the second, if this is the second scenario, Peter Clover is in the bar. He appears in the bar at this point, even though we've already been in the bar and he wasn't there. He's obviously just wandered in. But we have a different Act 3A depending on which of those two circumstances
that's right.
occur.
Yep.
So all in is if Morgan's around, we have the option of parlaying Morgan in the VIP area. That's a test willpower of 3 to shake him out of his daze. And if we do that enough times, we shake him enough, he'll go with us. Whereas the alternative is we head back and find Peter Clover and escort him out of the club.
That's a much tougher gig. I mean, that's a lot more difficult. So if you're here first, you basically parley Morgan and you get to the back alley, and then you can resign. You can just get out, basically, which is not too bad. The main thing about the back alley, though, is that, and this is deliberate because it's not been changed, is you won't get the victory point if you resign here because you'll drop clues here.
Definitely, yes.
And it's been asked whether that's a mistake, and it's not. So there's really relatively few ways you can get this victory point. And still resign. So there's, one way is to use I'm out of here, is one way of doing it. But there's not that many ways that you're going to end up with the victory point here.
Yes, it's whether you can manipulate the situation that you don't have clues on you, but I'm not sure how you could do that, actually.
But it's fairly difficult to do. So a lot of the time you're not going to get the victory point in the back alley. Which feels a bit strange, to be honest. I mean, it does feel... I think a lot of people have a house rule where if you resign at the back alley, you keep the victory point if you've investigated. I mean, that's what I've read. A lot of people do that anyway as a house rule because they kind of feel like it's a bit ridiculous if you've, not to get it.
Like the impossible victory
point. Yeah, I mean...
almost.
You can do it, but it's kind of convoluted. But the opposite, the other alternative is you've got to backtrack back through to the bar and you get Peter Clover that way. Now, interestingly enough, he doesn't suffer from being attacked by the abominations because whilst he's traded human and criminal, he's not traded human, criminal, enemy.
Yes, because he's not an enemy card, is he? He's an
ally card.
So that's the difference.
Yeah. So so basically you've got to backtrack. You've got to then you've got to grab him and get out. But you've got these abominations, so it's much more difficult to do that, to grab Peter Clover in that way. So. It's.
But yeah, again, I suppose if we're going to talk about how, I think this scenario is less complex than the other one, but again, we do have the multiple outcomes. So obviously, if we're playing this scenario first, that's the only way we can find Dr. Morgan. Because as we've just said, he will be sat there in the VIP area.
Yep.
If we're playing it second, Peter Clover's there, and if we're able to escort him out, then we get Naomi and the O'Banions on our side for the rest of the campaign.
Yes, which has quite significant, that makes a significant difference.
Essentially, that is the one resolution out of the 5 available to us where the O'Banions are on our side. So it's obvious how it's almost though it's saying like chances are they are not going to be on your side for the rest of the campaign. So this is the one rare outcome.
That's exactly right, and I've never had that. I've never done that. So I've always ended up with these bloody O'Banion people in Dunwich, and they're a pain in the backside. I mean, they always seem to pop
they
up.
basically go in as an extra encounter set.
Oh, they do, and they always seem to bloody pop up when I least, and they really do kind of. They can be quite annoying. So, yeah, but it's no. I mean, I think of all these two scenarios, backtracking from the VIP area through to get Peter Clover and then get him back out is no small feat. It's actually quite challenging. So when I think about it, the first time you play, the easiest way to end up with at least one of the allies would be to do House Always Wins first, because it's the most straightforward. You just got to get yourself to the VIP area, get Morgan, and then get out the back door. If not, you're either having to find Warren Rice in the admin building, and I'm talking about the first time you play, or you've got to get all the way over to Peter Clover back in the bar and get out, which is quite challenging because there'll be criminals and abominations in your way there and on the way back. So unless you're really good at fight or evasion, it's going to be quite a difficult task. There we go. So that's House Always Wins. So so there's a number of different resolutions, aren't there, from this, Kevling? And there's again about 4.
Yeah.
Aren't
So So if you play this scenario first, you can. Well, let's do it in order. Resolution 1 is that you've not found Dr. Morgan.
Oh.
And the Urbanians have a bone to pick with you.
Oh, great. Worst outcome of everything.
Resolution 2 you can only do if you play this scenario first, and that's if you find Dr. Morgan, and again, the Urbanians have a bone to pick with you. Resolution 3 you can only do this if you've played the scenario second, and that is to get Peter Clover out, and then obviously the Urbanians, Naomi has your back then, is the outcome there. And then resolution 4 is if you fail to do anything, the Urbanians have a bone to pick with you and you are unconscious for several hours. And then the other option is the resign defeat, which again is the Urbanians have a bone to pick with you, but at least you are still conscious. But then we have an interlude before we move on to scenario 2, and basically the difference here is if you were unconscious for several hours, then you get back and Dr. Armitage has been kidnapped, so he's gone as well.
Oh my god, it's a kidnap fest.
But you get a couple of extra bonus points because you read his notes.
And go a bit crazy. Oh my god. Yeah. Oh, he's still alive, but he's pale and sweaty.
Or at least if you were able to stay conscious throughout both of the first two scenarios, then at least you're able to have a chat with Armitage.
Yeah.
And like you said earlier, he then explains what he's really
Then he
on.
explains to you. It's like, oh, sorry to pull you into all of this.
And you get to add him to your deck as well, if you want.
Yeah, so it's only after you go through all this, he goes, oh, actually, I should tell you what's going on. Oh, thanks, Armitage.
Some of this information might have been useful up front.
Yes. Don't you think you should have told me this beforehand so I knew what I was getting myself into?
You know what? I'm not putting you in my deck. There.
Yes, right. Yeah. Well, so what do you think? What do you think of these two scenarios?
I enjoy both of them. I think, like we've said in the conversation, I think narratively, the Clover Club one works best. Everything flows. There's a logic to why things are happening. It all fits in with the story. But as we were struggling to explain why things were happening in extracurricular activities, there's obviously a gap there as to why things are happening. Maybe the gap is that Armitage hasn't filled us in, but the logic doesn't flow quite so well in extracurricular activities as it does in House Always Wins.
No, I completely agree. I mean, I like extracurricular activity because of, it sort of brings it to life really nicely. But you're right, it doesn't quite connect. And I think the House Always Wins is a more successful scenario because I think not only does it bring things to life, I like the way it mechanically and story-wise uses that thing of the prowling pit boss and the gambling, and I think that sort of really kind of adds an extra element of fun, which makes sense. The gameplay and mechanics align quite well.
Yeah, I agree with that. But again, they're both excellent scenarios, and they both add new mechanics and ways of using the same rules that we've been familiar with as we played through Night of the Zealot, but they apply them in different ways to, like you say, like different ways of trying to find clues to find out what's going on in the Clover Club. Finding different ways of getting into locations by having to find Jazz Mulligan, and so he can let you in. It's just that sort of extra layers to the design. It's good stuff.
Yeah, that's a really good point. That if you were used to the first three scenarios, Midnight Masks and The Gathering and Devour Below, this really would open up the possibilities. And if you weren't playing some kind of person who has relatively high intellect, you'd be pleasantly surprised with the House Always Wins, because you can get clues relatively easily without necessarily having the high intellect, which would be a surprise the first time, because you would sort of think things have to be done a certain way, and these scenarios show they don't have to be done a certain way. They can be done in, like you say, quite flexible ways. So yeah, fantastic. Yeah, that's a really good point. So I think, like we said before, we're not coming from this criticism. We're coming from this criticism from a place of love and respect, and they're both great scenarios. They really do kind of create an atmosphere in that way, and they really do open things up. So yeah, that was fantastic. So what are we going to do next time, Kevlin? Where are we heading off after this? Is it just off into the wild blue yonder, and that's it? We're done.
You may be surprised here. We're actually going to be staying in Dunwich and moving on to the museum. So we're going to learn a bit more of the backstory that Armitage has just filled us in on about, or we've read from his journal.
Yes.
And then we go off to the museum to try and find out a little more.
Yes, and it's nice, isn't it? So we've had a university campus, we've had a speakeasy gambling club, and now we're off to a museum. So it's lots of varied locations, which is fantastic. Just what you want when you're playing this kind of thing. So it's awesome.
Excellent.
All right, great. Well,
looking forward to that.
Yeah, that's brilliant. So, thank you very much, everyone, for listening. I hope you enjoyed that. Please, there'll be some. We'll let you know where you can contact us if you've got any comments or criticisms. But we're very much looking forward to tackling the next scenario, which is the Miskatonic Museum, which we will do in the next few weeks. But until then, I'm CrabbyTerror8.
And I'm Kevling.
And we'll see you next time. See ya.
Bye.
So thank you very much for listening. Please like, comment and subscribe. We'd very much like to hear from you. If you would like to send us your thoughts, send it to ftextpodcast@gmail.com. That's FTEXT podcast, ftextpodcast@gmail.com. You can also listen to this podcast on YouTube. Just go to Out of Ammo, Out of Time, and you will find it there. And it's also available on the usual podcast platforms. Till then, thanks very much for listening, and see you soon. Bye-bye.